After a bit of a hiatus, I'm back with another episode of the Millennium Rewatch. This time we're taking on episode 11 of season 1 called Weeds, which originally aired on January 24th, 1997. Weeds opens in a picturesque neighborhood where all seems perfect and beautiful, but not so for this week's antagonist, who sees the people in the neighborhood as decaying zombies. Josh Comstock is having a birthday party that he's way too cool for. I think I had that same haircut in the 90s. His dad surprises him with the dirt bike, but Josh can't be bothered to react. He leaves to go for a ride, but he meets with the business end of a cattle prod. The next morning, Mom finds a dead body in her son's bed, but it's not Josh. Frank arrives to consult on the investigation, and we're formally introduced to this upper-middle-class gated community.
We got walls around all 3 square miles. 24-hour private security. Everything you can do to keep your kids safe, these folks have done it.
The dead boy is identified as Kirk Orlando, who went missing 3 days earlier and was left at the Comstock residence. The medical examiner determines the boy bled to death, but more disturbingly, he finds blood in the boy's stomach.
Not his own, someone else's.
Meanwhile, in the killer's appropriately creepy lair, he's forcing Josh to drink blood. Frank speaks to the community and tells them the killer is most likely one of their own.
What does he want? Why is this man doing these terrible things?
He doesn't want anything. He's insane.
The Comstocks return home after the meeting to find Josh's bike parked in front. They rush inside but only find a message, the number 331 written in blood on Josh's bed. The father reveals to Frank the number is the hotel room where he met a woman he was having an affair with, an affair that Josh found out about. Meanwhile, the killer is busy taking his next victim, Charlie Birkenbuell. Could they have made that name more difficult to pronounce? The next morning, group member Cheryl Andrews shows up to help Frank out.
Cheryl, thanks for coming out.
Security here is excellent, Frank. I've been stopped twice since I entered the gates.
Frank reveals he was only giving half-truths about the killer at the community meeting in order to force him to send a message.
This was planned, Frank. You didn't prompt him to act. You just didn't disrupt his pattern.
Frank notices some dead fish and thinks it might be a message from the killer. The sheriff reveals that both Josh Comstock and Charlie Birkenbuell were on the swim team. Swim coach Adam Burke acts suspiciously when questioned about the missing boys. The sheriff tells Frank that the coach's son was killed in a hit-and-run incident at the gated community a year previous.
What happened?
Hit-and-run driver just outside the gate. Carl was only 8.
Frank returns home and is visited by his overly friendly neighbor, Jack, who has just received an envelope for Frank by mistake. Inside is a paint swatch with the number 528 on it. Meanwhile, back at the gated community, a neighborhood watch has been formed with trigger-happy white guys. You know this isn't going to turn out well. They see a guy in a hoodie lurking around, which is apparently the natural enemy for all trigger-happy white guys, even back in 1997. They hit him with their car and find out they just hit a kid who was just sneaking out to see his girlfriend after curfew.
It's just a kid.
Frank takes the Comstock man home, who reveals that he told his wife about his affair, and that she left him over it. They arrive at his home to find his son Josh has been returned. Cheryl Andrews calls Frank to let him know the mystery ingredient that killed the fish at the Birkenbuell house was scotch.
Single malt, I'd say.
They also determine the color swatch Frank received is the same color as the car that hit and killed Coach Burke's son. Frank finds a football that belonged to Coach Burke's son in the Birkenbuell house, and it's filled with blood. Frank suspects Bob Birkenbuell is responsible for the death of the coach's son, and they arrest him to try to set up a trap for the killer. However, he doesn't take the bait. Instead, he leaves a tape for the cops, with Charlie telling his dad he hasn't done enough.
He says what you've done isn't enough. He says he's merciful, but he says he's just.
Frank recognizes a sound on the tape as a diving board, which leads them to a creepy room under the high school pool.
Let's split up. Move quietly.
That's a good idea. Cheryl finds the blood and the missing boy Charlie, but the killer finds her too. The killer turns out to be someone from the gated community who couldn't accept what he saw as the hypocrisy of his neighbors.
You see what they'll do to their children? They'll make them just the way they are, sick and corrupt.
The first victim's father had committed a crime involving money, though it's never really revealed what the crime was exactly. Josh was kidnapped because his father was having an affair and keeping it secret from his wife. And finally, Charlie Birkenbuell was kidnapped because his father was the one responsible for getting drunk and hitting the swimming coach's son. In the end, Frank and the sheriff returned to Birkenbuell's house to find he has hung himself, rather than truly face justice for what he has done. Weeds is the first Millennium episode written by Frank Spotnitz, who was writing a lot of X-Files episodes at the time. He would later go on to reboot Kolchak the Night Stalker, simply titled Night Stalker. Currently he has a new series for Amazon called The Man in the High Castle, based on the book by legendary sci-fi author Philip K. Dick. The always great CCH Pounder makes her second appearance here as group member Cheryl Andrews and serves up some great commentary on gated, white, upper-middle-class communities. It's interesting looking back on this episode in 2015 and seeing a storyline where gun-toting neighborhood watch members are running down a man wearing a hoodie. Something that has a very chilling connection after the shooting death of Trayvon Martin by a neighborhood watch member in 2012. Weeds suffers a bit from the heavy-handedness of its morality, basically pushing a narrow view of living the life without sin. While infidelity is maybe immoral, kidnapping and possibly killing a kid to force a man to admit to it seems extreme. Ultimately, the killer is just as wrong as the people he's trying to out as sinners. That's it for this episode of the Millennium Rewatch. Big thanks to the Back to Frank Black campaign for their support of this series. If you enjoyed this review, please like this video and subscribe to see more reviews every week.